welcome to Crime in Court. This is the 1996 Menendez brothers retrial. We are reading through the transcript California versus Erik and Lyle Menendez on trial for the homicides of their parents, Kitty and Jose. We are on the defense's case, part 22. The defense right now, they've had issues with scheduling of their experts. A lot of them are doctors, so they're trying to, make all everybody's schedules work. So unfortunately, we had Cyril Wecht on the stand last Monday in trial time, and now this is the following Monday, December 4th, 1955. Nope, 1995. Took us back way longer than I needed to. 1995, December 4th, and this is the continuation of Dr. Cyril Wecht's testimony. He is a forensic pathologist. We had a little bit of direct with him. She's probably going to have to reiterate some of the points that she made and then go from there. So it was Leslie Abramson, who was doing the questioning. We'll see who's doing it. I'm sure it's still Leslie here, so let's get started. Please hit the like button and let's begin. So, the following proceedings were held in court outside the presence of the jury. The court says, in the trial, everybody is present. Morning to you all. Ready for the jury? Mr. Khan says. Mr. Khan is for the state. You can see all the attorneys on the screen if you need a reference. There's so many, that's why I put them on the screen because it's confusing. All right, so Mr. Khan for the state says one issue, Your Honor. Again, I object to the podium being where it is. Now, counsel keeps moving it further and further closer to me. I can't see this jury at all. The court says, all you have to do is say something. Mr. Khan says, I told counsel. She said she's going to move it later. I don't want to see. The court says, move it. Move it now. It's not a big deal. Ms. Abramson says, I said I wanted to let the witness go by and I'd move it back. That's exactly what I told him. The court says, why don't you move it now? It's not a big deal. And Ms. Abramson moves the podium. What was that all about? Are we children in kindergarten? Like, teacher, she won't do something I need her to do. Mr. Khan says, I object. I object to this being, it's practically touching my left elbow. I feel cramped in here. We have very little space here as it is. She has it rubbing up against my elbow. Miss Abramson says, I wouldn't want to touch his left elbow. I'll wait until the witness goes by and I'll move it. The court says, okay, then we'll deal with it at recess if not. Like, what is this? This attorney's being a baby. Ms. Abramson says, yes, Your Honor. The court says, are we ready to proceed? Ms. Abramson says, yes, Your Honor. Court says, let's get the jury out, please. The jury enters the courtroom and the following proceedings are held. The court says, the jury's in court. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. We're ready to resume with the trial. We'll pick up with the witness who was on the witness stand and then we had to break. Ms. Abramson says, we call Dr. Cyril Wecht. The court says, let's give you the oath again since it's been a week since you were on the witness stand. See if you remember it. And he's sworn in and all that good stuff. Now, direct examination for this witness resumes. And it is Ms. Abramson doing the questioning. She says, Dr. Wecht, when we broke, you had been explaining to the jury some of your background and experience, and I wanted to pick up with that in this regard. You testified to a very large number of autopsies that you personally have performed and some 30,000 additional ones that you have signed off on. Can you give us an approximation of how many autopsies you have performed involving gunshot wounds? I would say probably somewhere around 1,000. And would that be typical that with the 13,000 autopsies you have performed, 1,000 of them would be gunshot wounds? Yes, that's an estimated figure. I think it's a reasonable approximation. I don't keep track of these things by category. For most pathologists, strike that. For most forensic pathologists, including those who serve as county coroners, What are the vast majority of the autopsy with respect to cause of death? What are the vast majority of those cases? You mean that coroners and medical examiners do? Yes. Heart attacks. So they're deaths by natural causes. Yes. And what's the second largest category? Accidents. Motor vehicular being the largest number within the accidental grouping. And after accidents, what would you say is the next largest? Self deletions. Can't say that on YouTube. I try to I ignore the most of the words you can't say, but there's certain words like that you can't say. So we'll just say self deletion. I hate it. It sounds so stupid, but that's what it is. All right, question. And are homicides then even fewer in number than self deletions typically? Yes, the numbers are fairly close between self deletions and homicides in the US. Not a big difference between the two, and it varies a little from one community to another. That's interesting that they're about the same ratio. Among the homicides, what percentage generally, if you have that in mind, are gunshot homicides versus strangulation or stabbing or poisoning or any other kind of things? Probably about 75% are gunshot wounds among homicides in the United States. Now, among I wonder if these statistics hold true today or if they've shifted. That would be an interesting thing to learn if the statistics are still the same today, all these 35 years ago, 36 years ago. Probably about 75% are gunshot wounds among the homicides in the US. Now, among the 1,000 estimated gunshot wounds, these are the autopsies that you perform yourself. Yes. Of the 30,000 that you reviewed and signed off on, do you have any idea, how many of those were gunshot wounds? Well, probably somewhere more than 10%. I'd say roughly 3,500 to 4,000. That's more of a select group to some extent. Consultations obviously come in because they have some problems, and you usually don't have problems if you've got someone who died of a heart attack or had cancer or stroke. So I would say maybe about 3,500 to 4,000, something like that. All right. And how many shotgun wound autopsies have you personally performed? I would just say approximately 100, or maybe about 1/10 of the total gunshot wound cases having involved gunshot shotguns, something like that. And do you? I think it's a reasonable number. Please keep in mind that these go back now. All these numbers are applicable for me to a 34-year period. In fact, a little bit more because I had a few such cases when I was in the Air Force, not many, but a few that we did on base. But 34 years is the period of time I'm talking about. And are shotgun wound firearm homicides less than 50% of all the firearm homicides? Oh, yes, I think unquestionably in any jurisdiction in this country. So the type of gun used in this case, we know shotguns were used. They are rare. Shotgun homicides are not the norm, especially when it comes to deaths by gunshot. Shotguns are really a very small percentage, which means there are very few people, experts, who can speak to this. So keep that in mind that, there are experts like this guy who, stays in his lane, and the other experts that the defense has put on so far that have stayed in their lane when giving their testimony about the trajectory, the angles, the positions, all that, they say it can't be reconstructed. And then compare that with Dr. McCarthy, who's like, "Oh yeah, I reconstructed it all. It, it's just speculation. All of my images are speculation, but I reconstructed it all." So there's a big difference in the quality of experts here. Just wanted to point out. We know that, but because Dr. McCarthy was a pretty terrible witness. Oh yes. Um, I think unquestionably in any jurisdiction in this country, firearms or shotgun wounds are less than 50%. And is the most frequent firearm injury handgun injury? Yes. And in your opinion, Dr. Wecht, does it take hands on or personal observation familiarity with shotgun wounds in order to be able to reliably determine entries and exits from shotgun wound entries? Yes, that's the nature of forensic pathology, which, by the way, Dr. McCarthy is not a forensic pathologist, even though he testified as one, basically. This witness goes on to say it's no different than any other specialty. You can't do heart surgery unless you've taken a residency and training in cardiovascular surgery, and you don't do brain surgery unless you're trained in neurosurgery. If you're talking about gunshot wounds, exit, entrance, determination of depth, lethality, sequence, so on and so forth, you're talking about forensic pathology, not a mechanical engineer. And what is the advantage to having actually seen these wounds rather than just read about them in books? Well, pictures are fine, and some pictures are wonderful, but it's like anything else, you've got to actually see it in order to understand it, and you learn as you go along. That's why forensic pathology has that additional training period over and above regular pathology. Most people who train in pathology in this country never see a gunshot wound case because, by law, it's going to be a coroner or a medical examiner's case. Okay, so most pathologists, if you're not an ME or coroner, you're not going to see it. And it's going to be taken from the coroner or ME. So you don't see it in a private hospital work? No. And you don't see it in private consulting work unless you have a contract at some point to act as coroner or medical examiner. That's correct. And for someone training to become a forensic pathologist, are there certain coroners' offices around the country that conduct internships, basically, or training programs for those people who are interested in, for pathologists who want to be too? Yes, they're called residencies or fellowships because they usually are post residency, and the answer is that they are, I don't know, maybe about a dozen and a half accredited offices for such training programs. And is the Los Angeles County Coroner's Office one of them? Yes. San Francisco? Yes. New York City? Yes. Other places around the country? Yes, including our facility, Allegheny County, Pittsburgh, Philadelphia, Detroit, Miami, Atlanta, Dallas, Houston, San Diego, Seattle, Chicago. Larger areas for the most part. And typically, if someone who is a pathologist wants to be a forensic pathologist, would they obtain one of these fellowships? Strike that. How long is the training period? How long are these fellowships? It's 1 full year after 3 or 4 years of basic training in pathology. So you're doing 4 or 5 years total in just training in pathology. And what was mechanical engineer McCarthy's training? Oh, yeah, that's right. It was in physics and engineering. So, totally different area. And typically, if someone wanted to become a forensic pathologist, they would obtain one of these fellowships and spend a year in one of these offices. Yes, you must do so in order to be qualified to take the national examination. What about someone, I'm sorry? I was just going to say you can't be admitted to take the examination unless you had such a training program. When it was first established, the American Board of Pathology subsection of forensic pathology, some people were admitted to take the examination based upon that experience. That continued for some years. To my knowledge, to my knowledge, you now have to take a fellowship in order to be admitted to the examination. Are you familiar with the testimony of Dr. Lawrence concerning how he obtained his forensic pathology training? I read his testimony. I refresh your recollection. He said he spent a month or two, the witness says, in different places in the summertime or something like that. Yeah. Well, I've never heard of that, but I mean, I have no problem if the American Board of Pathology accepted it. It's up to them, and I haven't heard of such a staggered program. But it's perhaps a nice way to do it while maintaining your own practice and going off a month, using your vacation time or so on. There's nothing wrong with that. In order to get one of these fellowships, where a large coroner's office agrees to train you for a year, are those competitive positions? Yes, they are. More so in recent years because of what's been happening in medicine, but yes, the better programs are competitive. It's not like some of the residencies in ophthalmology and orthopedic surgery, which lead to major incomes, but there's some competition. So you have to be accepted. You can't just show up and say, "I want to hang around with you." Or sorry, you can't just say, "I want to show up and hang around with you guys," or "I want to train with you." That's correct. Now, have you, over the course of your years as a forensic pathologist, both when you were a coroner for 10 years in Allegheny County and in your private consulting capacity, have you participated in training to figure out concerning gunshot wound cases? What happened, how the wounds were inflicted, the relative positions of the person inflicting the wounds and the decedent, the locations of the people, the angles of the shot or shots, the sequence of shots. Have you participated in such exercises? Yes. By definition, you would attempt to do some extent in any kind of a gunshot wound case. Even if you believe it's a self-deletion, you don't have many problems or any problems in the majority of cases, but you have to have some idea and come up with some thoughts which are then recorded, and in cases of known suspected or alleged homicides or accidental shootings, transmitted to police officers, homicide detectives, and other investigative agencies. Well, let's say, for example, you're dealing with a self deletion, and let's say it's just a one shot self deletion. What kind of information routinely would a forensic pathologist try to figure out about that? Well, you'd want to know as much as you could about the scene to make sure that there was nothing that was atypical or inconsistent with a self-inflicted shot. Then you'd want to take that information and correlate it with your autopsy findings. Well, let me interject a question. For example, if it's a suspected self-deletion, do you look to see if the place where the wound is and given whatever weapon is suspected, if it's physically possible that that person could have done this? Particularly physically possible in the particular case where the body was located? Yes. That's the kind of thing you would routinely do. Yes. And do forensic pathologists routinely indicate in their reports the internal trajectory of a wound? For example, when a pathologist talks about a wound being front to back, or left to right, or upward or downward, they're talking about the wound path inside the body, correct? Yes, as well as the locations of the wounds externally. Now, none of that information, the exact location of the wound externally, nor the trajectory, is necessarily required to give a cause of death. I mean, you could say gunshot wound, causing death, without going through all that, correct? That's correct. And in some jurisdictions, for example, self deletions may not be autopsied if you're satisfied and the police are satisfied. You may note where the wounds are and not do an examination, and there's no problem with that if that's the policy. If you have a wound, let's say through the roof of the mouth, and it's come out of the back of the head, and it's the policy of the police not to do self deletions, and everything is in order. The person shot themselves behind locked doors, left a note. Police are satisfied, then you don't have to do the autopsy. You would withdraw blood for toxicological analyses because sometimes that's important, but these are policy decisions that vary somewhat from one officer to another. If it's a known, suspected, or alleged homicide, then, as far as I'm concerned, universal forensic pathology dictates that the autopsy be done. And that if you're doing the autopsy, that you make note of these trajectory things because they may be an issue ultimately in answering the question of what happened. Yes. So you have participated in that inquiry many, many times, I take it. Yes. And are some events involving gunshot wound killings? For some of those events, have you been in a position where you could answer the question or come close to a perfect answer to the question? What happened? Yes, sometimes perfect. I don't know what you mean by perfect, but where we could definitively, well, let's say with reasonable scientific certainty. Yes, yes, or definitively ascertain what happened. Yes. I would say in the majority of cases you can do so, especially then if you have some information from your own office investigators and from the homicide detectives. So, in order to do that, to try to answer the question of what happened, you have to work with the investigators and get information directly from them ordinarily. Yes. Keep in mind that some cases nobody knows anything. So then you're stuck with the body and some scene investigations, which may or may not be helpful. But, well, have you personally gone to crime scenes as part of your function as a forensic pathologist? Yes. How does that in this typical in is this typical in Allegheny County that the coroner's called out to a crime scene and an actual doctor yourself goes? No, not in every case. There are a few jurisdictions where that is done, but in most jurisdictions in the United States, it's proved to be simply unfeasible, impractical because of personnel demands. Unlike Jack Klugman playing Quincy, I don't know that reference at all. You don't have one case and traipse all over America while everybody at the ranch is taking care of everything else. You've got a workload of cases. So the answer is you go when the police homicide detectives would like you to go. You go because you're concerned about the case based upon preliminary information received by your office. You go because of the societal concerns. It could be something like a police shooting. It could be a matter that could provoke a racial confrontation or so on. You have to keep in mind when you're a medical examiner or a coroner that you have a governmental societal role. You're more than just a pathologist working in a hospital, so you play that by ear. But the answer to your question simply is no, I do not go. And it has never been a policy of the office where I was there to go to each and every death scene. How many have you gone to? Well, several hundred, all kinds. Several hundred of all kinds, and gunshot wound cases, both of my own and cases where I've gone in later having been consulted by an agency or an attorney. I would say probably about 100, something like that. And has that been important in those cases where you were able, with a reasonable degree of scientific certainty, to answer the question that happened? Has it been important that you were able to go to the actual crime scene in those cases? Yes. Sometimes it proved to be fruitless. Sometimes it proved to be redundant. But I would say the majority of times I felt I learned something. Now, with respect to this case, Dr. Wecht, did you have and have you had for some months copies of the autopsy reports and the amendments to the autopsy reports that were prepared by Dr. Golden of the LA County Coroner's Office? Yes, I have. He's Dr. Golden. If you don't remember, he's the one that did the autopsy himself. Ms. Abramson says, Your Honor, at this time it hasn't been done. What I would like to do is mark the reports, starting with the reports on Mary L. Menendez. I'd like to mark the actual report. I believe the next number is 334A. The court says 333. Do you have something on 333? She says 333. All right. What I'd like to do is mark the main report, the one that was, I just want to get the sign in dates. The one that was signed off on October 13th, 1989 as 333A. I would like then to mark the supplemental report, as it was called, which was signed off on August 11th, 1992, 333B, and the supplemental report that was signed on September 25th, 1995, 333C. Then I'd like to mark the reports dealing with Jose E. Menendez as 30, 334A for the main report signed off on October of 1989. The supplemental report of September 25th, 1995. There's no 92 amendment for his is 334B. And I'd like to just approach the witness and show him exhibits and ask if these appear to be the copies of the same autopsy reports and supplements that he has reviewed. Yes. Based on your experience, Dr. Wecht, would you characterize the autopsies that were performed here with respect to how complex or difficult they appear to be from the photographs and the descriptions? I would consider these to be complex cases by virtue of the multiple shotgun blasts, the multiplicity of the wounds, the extensive nature of the injuries. And in addition to those reports, did you review close to 200 photographs of the crime scene and of the decedents? I did not make note, at least as I recall today, of the number, but it certainly seems like there were a couple hundred. I've seen different sets of photos, and I really don't know how many were in any packet, but I know have been more than a couple hundred all told. Of the scene of the shooting and of the decedents. Yes, there were an awful lot of them. Did you also review the testimony of Dr. Golden from the previous trials? Yes, I did. All right. Sorry, I had to pause for a second there. And I realized that I forgot to turn off my living room light so that you guys can see my little diffuser there that lights up. So, Alexa, turn off living room light. There you go. I have I love essential oils and just for a little side note, I like essential oils a lot. I use them for a lot of things. I like a lot of natural I have so many medical issues, so I use a lot of natural substances or remedies and things. So I have in my diffuser today eucalyptus, lemon, and a tiny bit of frankincense just to clear the sinuses and clear my head, do those brain fog, get all that brain fog. Plus the lemon. I love lemon. I love anything citrus because it's just like light and happy. It like wakes you up. So I like that as well. So in case you were wondering what that is, behind me, that is a diffuser with different essential oils. So, all right. Continuing on. Sorry about that. I had to pause because my boyfriend was leaving and whatever. You don't care. Anyways, let's go on. And have you also read the testimony in this case, in this trial, or of Dr. Robert Lawrence, of Dr. Roger McCarthy, and of Dr. Martin Fackler? Yes. So Dr. Robert Lawrence and Dr. Roger McCarthy for the state, witnesses for the state, those are their expert witnesses to reconstruct the crime scene. Dr. Fackler was obviously a witness for the defense, and he was an excellent witness at that, talking about the crime scene. He says, yes, he read all their testimony. Did you also consult briefly with Dr. Fackler when both of you were in Los Angeles on the same day? Yes. About a week and a half ago? Briefly at your office 2 weeks ago? Yes. Yesterday. Okay. Based on your experience over the years and all the cases that you have worked on, Dr. Wecht, and all of your knowledge about forensic pathology, do you believe that the events that occurred here, that resulted in the wounds to these decedents can be so called reconstructed to any level of scientific reliability. No. Again, we have another witness for the defense who says this crime scene is so complex, you cannot reconstruct it to a level of scientific certainty. You just can't do it. This witness says no. With a couple of exceptions, I believe I can determine which most probably were the final wounds to Mr. Menendez and Mrs. Menendez. But as far as putting things together and ascertaining a sequence with which multiple shotgun wounds number, no, I could not do that. That's because you're not talented enough? Is that why? Well, I think, I've average competency and experience in forensic pathology. I just don't see how it can be done, and I would not attempt to do it. So, yeah, we have another person who would not even attempt to reconstruct this scene. Yet, McCarthy's like, I'm the genius mechanical engineer who can do it all and figure it out. And question the medical expertise and come up with my own. Continuing on, he says, I would try to respond to any questions the homicide detectives might have, and I would certainly review with them things. And this is a cause that you very likely would go to the scene, especially if you were asked. I think I would probably go to the scene if I were asked. If I weren't asked, I think I would probably go to the scene if I weren't asked because it's so complex. If you had been here, if I had been here, yes, of course. But even allowing for that, the answer is no, I could not. I cannot put this together for you and tell you the order of the shots and other things related to that, except I do have opinions as to which were most probably the final shots that these two people sustained. And do you think there's enough information or evidence here to determine what positions each or both of the decedents were in relative to each or either of the guns that were used for you to be able to determine such things as who was where when any particular shot was fired? I believe I could probably make some educated determinations. Might prefer to use the phrase educated guesses. I wouldn't be insulted with regards to, some of the wounds if I told any other things. Again, photos and even scene investigation, on site examination, but otherwise, I do not believe that it would be reasonable to attempt to do so. Please keep in mind as part of my answer so that you will understand you're not talking about an immobile, static situation. A shooting is a dynamic, mobile situation. Multiple gunshot wounds of people who are conscious and alive, who are not under the influence of drugs, who have not been rendered unconscious by having been bashed over the head or so on, or having been found asleep, none of which, to my knowledge, is applicable to this case. And it's my understanding that there are two people who have done the shooting, and there are two people we know who are dead. And it's my understanding that the two people who are dead were alive and conscious when this occurred. I'm not aware of any difference of opinion in that regard, and you have then four people in a room with shots being fired. And I have no way of knowing exactly how somebody moved when they shot to their right or to their left, whether they crouched or kneeled or stood straight up constantly. And of course, keep in mind that can change from one shot to the other. It's not like you have a fixed position. And I have no way of knowing the two people who are being shot, what their efforts were to get out of the way or what their involuntary movements were then when they were struck by the blasts. There's a lot of kinetic energy associated with a shotgun blast, and then you have the falling, ducking, twisting, turning, all of which come into play. So, it is for all of those reasons that I find any effort to reconstruct to simulate this shooting to be doomed a failure. Doomed a failure. So, you're not going to be able to do it. Period. You just can't reconstruct it. It's not a matter of I think who is brighter or so on. I cannot speak for obviously the world of forensic pathology, but I think I have some ideas of these kinds of things, cases generally, and I can represent, speaking for myself, that I have never seen an attempt made to reconstruct with specificity the sequence of shots and the location of two shooters and two people who are being shot from one shot to another. Never seen it. Never seen an attempt at this in all of his 30 something years. He's not the only witness saying this. So I believe that this case cannot be reconstructed. You've never heard of this trying to be done at any time before? I have never experienced it, no. And apart from you personally being involved in it, you are very active in forensic pathology organizations and groups and educational programs, are you not? Yes, I have been for more than 3 decades in this country and in international organizations, and as a member of an editorial board of about 20 or more national and international scientific forensic pathology publications, reviewing articles, and then getting those journals and so on. I do not recall ever having seen a case with wounds in excess of 10 or 12 involving two people and two shooters where somebody has put everything together. Sometimes you have eyewitnesses and you still can't put it together. And even then, you've got a problem. And we all know about eyewitness testimony. We've heard enough about that in the world of fiction to know that that's not as reliable, but as one might think. But in the absence of eyewitnesses, I won't repeat what I've said. My answer is as I've given. You just can't recreate. What I'd like to do now, though, is turn to some of the specific wounds that are involved that the decedents in this case sustained so we can get the benefit of your opinion concerning certain issues that there has been some inconsistent testimony on in this case. And what I'd like to do, what's up on the board right now, that's Exhibit 295, and that shows a series of photographs of mainly Mr. Menendez, but also one photograph of Mrs. Menendez. And this has to do with Roger McCarthy's illustration of a hypothetical shot number one. First of all, I want to turn your attention to what Dr. Golden labeled somewhat confusedly wounds number two and wounds number three, having to do with Mr. Menendez's upper right arm. You're familiar with the amendment that Dr. Golden wrote in 1995 indicating a lateral entrance wound and a medial exit wound for wound number three. Is that right? Yes. Now, first of all, if you take a look at 295, there is, I don't know if you can see the sub lettering, but there is a photograph that's lettered B, which is this one here. And does that, first of all, show the exit wounds for wound number three? Yes, I believe that it does, based upon Dr. Golden's amendment or amended description of that wound, the amendation of August 1995. I think that's the date. September? September. I'm sorry. Something else was August. This one was September, right? Now, Dr. Golden described this large defect. You're checking the date, Doctor? Yes, you. It doesn't make a difference, but it shows here 25th day, September 25th. Correct. Thank you. Okay, so we can agree with the date. Yes. What Dr. Golden is describing there is this exit wound that appears at the upper of the two apparent wound sites on the inner or medial aspect of the arm. The right arm, correct? Yes. Now, did Dr. Golden, in his original report, when he talked about individual satellite defects, can you see those individual defects in 295B? Yes. And did Dr. Golden indicate whether those individual satellite defects were, in his opinion at that time in the original report, entrances or exits, or was that left open? I th- I think they appear in the 89 report as part of the as part of his description of number three. Yes, that's exactly what I'm looking at, and I have that in front of me. He talks about the individual pellets, but you asked me, well, does he designate them? Does he designate them as to entrance or exit? With regard to the individual pellet wounds that we see in that photo, my answer to your question is that I do not see in his original 1989 autopsy report a specific designation as to whether they are entrance or exit. So no specific reference as to whether the wounds on his arm are exit or entrance. And I'm looking at the descriptions of his wound for number 3 and on pages 5 and 6 of that autopsy report. When you're dealing with shotgun pellet wounds, Dr. Wecht, and you're dealing specifically with so-called satellite wounds, individual defects, is it somewhat difficult to determine whether an individual pellet-sized defect is an entrance or an exit? Yes, it is. Now, with respect to the particular wound that you see on 295B, well, first of all, did you have available to you copies of the x rays and photographs of the x rays of this limb of Mr. Menendez's right arm? Yes. And in examining the nature, there's rather dramatic bone fracture in there, is there not? Yes. Did you form an opinion concerning whether or not those individual satellite defects may themselves be exit wounds? My opinion is they could be satellite exit wounds. So remember, we've talked in great detail with many of the defense experts about the wounds on Jose's arm. So he has, I believe, 9 defects, 5 pellets that were x-rayed inside the arm, and then the 4 missing pellets could just have been um 2 which were, an entry and an exit, 2 that entered and exited um, the arm at some point. And he says, yes, my opinion is that they could have been satellite exit wounds. So some of those defects on his arm could be exit wounds that reflected or refracted, whatever you want to say, bounced off of the bone after it shattered the bone and left an exit wound on the arm in the opposite direct or in a different direction than it came in. And with that exit wound from what entry? Well, you have some wound here, which is, to the best of my ability to understand Dr. Golden's autopsy presentation, wound number 3. You also have a wound number 2, which is lower down, not shown in this picture, and that wound goes through the upper portion of the forearm towards the crease in front of the elbow known as the antecubital fossa. So you've got 2 things to consider here. I believe that shows wounds could be satellite exit wounds that, or close to the large gaping laceration, which is the exit wound by the axilla, the armpit. It is possible that they could be related to wound number 2, and it would be some exit wounds of wound number 2. It's not possible to be certain, but that would be my first choice would be they are additional exit wounds of number 3 because they are close to the large exit wound and because the humerus was shattered. So his first choice would be they are exit wounds. His first choice of opinion, his best guess, his best scientific opinion is that they are exit wounds of number 3 because they are closest to the large exit wound and because the humerus was shattered. When the humerus was shattered, there certainly could have been some greater dispersal of the pellets, and then you can have individual pellets emerging through their own exit sites, not remaining with the body of pellets that makes the larger exit wound shown in that picture. Okay. And what you haven't told us yet, and this is for clarity, you're saying that both the large defect near the armpit, the axilla, and the individual satellites would all be coming from that big entry wound on the lateral aspect of the upper arm, correct? Oh, yes. You haven't asked me about the entrance wound, and that's why I haven't said anything about it. Sorry. The answer is yes. The exit wound shown in that picture is the exit wound of the large entrance wound, which Dr. Golden described in the posterior lateral position of the upper right arm. Posterior in back and lateral to the side. So when you come around to the side of the back, we say posterior lateral. We sometimes juxtapose those two anatomical terms or other anatomical terms if it's not purely back to front or so on. So, the entrance wound, which he describes in his supplemental report of September, on the first page of that report, is indeed located on the lateral posterior aspect of the right upper arm, and he describes it as approximately 2 inches in maximal diameter. So that, in my opinion, is the entrance wound. In other words, I agree with Dr. Golden's interpretation that that wound, as clarified by him in his supplemental report of September 1995, the wound entered essentially in the back of the right arm, the back of the right upper arm, went through, exited essentially in the front, more towards the trunk of that we call the medial, which means closer to the midline of the body, and it made that big gaping defect that you see just down from the armpit. Now, are you saying you're absolutely positive that the satellite defects are exits, or are you saying that this is one reasonable likelihood? The latter. It's one reasonable likelihood with regard to the small pellet wounds. And I believe it's a very reasonable conjecture, but I cannot state that with the same degree of certainty that I can with regard to the large exit wounds seen in that picture, nor with the degree of certainty that I can ascribe to the entrance wound, which is back around the upper right arm. In any event, though, Dr. Wecht, is it your opinion that it is utterly erroneous to call the large defect an entrance wound? Oh, yes, absolutely. The wound around the back part of the arm is significantly smaller. That wound, I've already told you, is about 2 inches. The wound that you are looking at there measured 6 by 4 inches. So you don't have a wound going in, making this big hole, and then coming back together and making a smaller hole. It is antithetical. It is directly contrary to what takes place with shotgun blasts. So the exits tend to be larger than the entrances? Yes. And that's a very typical kind of exit wound. It is large, it is irregular. So exit wounds are larger, irregular, and in this case, Dr. Golden was calling it an exit wound when it, or an entrance, whatever he called it, and an exit wound, and we're seeing that it probably wasn't. See, you're not going to get a wound like that where the entrance is that big. The entrance wound is essentially the size of the bore of the weapon. It'll be a little bit bigger as it comes out because when it goes back further, you get the pellet distribution and you may not have a single large entrance hole at all. So you can't get a hole like that that is entrance. It is far too big. It fits very well with the significantly smaller wound that Dr. Golden tells us about that Dr. Wound tells us about located on the posterior lateral aspect of the right arm. Okay, but there's nothing in what you've seen that rules out the possibility that the satellite defects are also exits from that same 2-inch entry hole on the back. That's correct. And I think among the choices available to me, that would be my first choice. I just want to say that I can't be absolutely certain since he did not trace them out. He didn't trace the wound, those defects individually from what you can gather? No, not from what I can see. Are you aware also? Let me show you the next board for a moment. This is 301. You've seen the one and only photograph, have you not, that shows what appears to be the pellet defects on Mr. Menendez's right forearm on the dorsal aspect. Yes. You're aware that when Dr. Golden amended his description of wound 3 in 1995, he deleted all reference to those pellet defects? Yes, if you take his word verbatim, then you can see certain photographs, and the answer then is yes, that's correct. So he deleted this one and he didn't rewrite any description of what these defects were, whether they were entrances or exits, or whether he had ever traced the track between those and anything else. Correct? That is correct. He did not. So he removed the picture of them and or description. He deleted photograph or maybe it's just the description, and didn't he didn't indicate in his amendment whether it was entrance or exit. And would you ever consider trying to reconstruct a shooting when there are wounds apparent in photographs that are basically unexplained by the coroner's protocol by the autopsy report? No. The absence of detailed description and anatomical dissection, and then some degree of relative consistency or difference between an original report and an amended report, all of these things obviously add to the difficulty, provide further consternation, and give you greater pause in trying to reconstruct with specificity with precision. Now, concerning another aspect of this wound, number 3, does Dr. Golden, I think he clarifies in his amendment, does he determine that there is a connection between the wound in the upper right arm and the bruise or abrasion pattern, whichever word he uses, on Mr. Menendez's right chest? Yes, he does. And do you, Dr. Wecht, connect those two wounds? Yes, I do. And why is it that you believe number 6, I believe he calls the pattern on marks the pattern of marks on the right chest is affiliated with wound number 3. How did those marks get on the chest, in your opinion? The marks on the picture in the upper left corner of this board. That's 295A. I'm sorry, 295A. You've got better eyes than I do. No, I marked it. I can see it's 295. Which constitute Dr. Golden's wound number 6. In the original autopsy report of 1989, he refers to those injuries as number 6. In my opinion, they are definitely related to wound number 3 of Mr. Menendez. Again, these numbers refer to Dr. Golden's original autopsy report. You asked me why. They are bruises and abrasions. They are not perforating or penetrating wounds. So the things that they keep saying are like what do they call it? Like a what's it called? I'm totally blanking on my words right now. Can't think of it. Sorry. Um when it doesn't penetrate but it goes across the skin. My God, I cannot think of the word. You guys are probably shouting at me. Um, you know. So he's saying these are bruises and abrasions, which is like a scrape, a cut, a scrape, or a bruise, not something that was, I feel like it starts with an S, like a skim across the skin, when it just like skims across the skin and just barely cuts or barely makes some kind of cut. God, what is the word? Oh my God, I'm blanking. You guys are probably screaming at me. Anyways, that's what the state is saying that this is. Whereas he's saying, no, these are bruises. These didn't come from a bullet. A graze. That's the word I was thinking of. Graze. Doesn't start with an S. A graze. So like when a bullet grazes your skin, it doesn't, the whole bullet doesn't go into your body, penetrate, and then exit. It only a portion of the bullet touches the skin and makes an indentation. That's what the state is saying those things on Jose's chest were from, or it was from, from his shirt pulling from the graze of the bullet, which it makes absolutely no sense and physically is impossible. So he's saying those are bruises, abrasions, not perforating or penetrating wounds. They indicate that something has impacted against the chest. So more so like pressure from him spinning around in his own arm, and the pressure from, or the force from the ammunition making his arm hit his chest or something, that would cause bruises and abrasions, not whatever they think is these wounds. It's not, the wounds are not adding up to what the state is saying that they are. He says if you just take your right arm and you move it to your right chest, and you keep in mind that the big blast is coming out from the anterior medial aspect of the right upper arm down from the armpit, you'll see that that comes down there across the portion of the chest, which what you're looking at is the explosive evulsive effect of the exit wounds number 3 coming on the right chest, and you have the soft tissues bursting out. So you have the bone itself possibly bursting out in a millisecond, and so on. That impacts against the right chest and gives you those constitutions and abrasions. And you see sometimes uninvolved areas, which apparently someone has attempted to refer to through the use of red colored arrows, and that would go along with probably some little bunching of the clothing that gave that kind of limited interspersed projection to the epidermis, the outer portion of the skin. But that's just so obvious, and I concur completely with Dr. Golden, who so states in his supplemental report. Now, when you say some cushioning, in other words, some bunching, rather the clothing, you're talking about here the impact of tissue, whether it's muscle or the bone underlying that. It's really the banging of the arm against the chest that calls objection leading, sustained. Are you saying that's what caused the bruises? Are human tissue versus pellets, for example? Yes, it is the impact of the arm, as I have attempted to explain, smashing up against the right upper anterior chest wall. So the arm, the pressure, the force from the pellets hits the arm hits the chest. All in, done in milliseconds, but that's what causes the bruising and abrasion on Jose's chest. So there you have it. Now, are you familiar with Dr. Lawrence's thesis that these wounds are caused by pellets somehow grabbing hold of the shirt and causing a shirt burn on the side of the chest wall? Yes, I read that. This is Dr. Lawrence, by the way, not Dr. Golden, the actual forensic pathologist who did the autopsy. Dr. Lawrence is the state's forensic pathologist witness. They did not call Dr. Golden, so they used Dr. Lawrence to evaluate Dr. Golden's autopsy reports and then report back, or testify about them. And he had some differing opinions than Dr. Golden, like this, for instance. And this doctor did read that testimony. So, did you also take a look at the shirt when you were here last time? Yes, you showed that to me. And what is your opinion concerning that thesis that Dr. Lawrence suggested? I disagree completely. I have never heard of anything like that. The garment being pulled as a result of the force of a gunshot wound across the skin is going to produce constitutions and abrasions of that magnitude. I can't. I can't really grasp what he's basing that on. I disagree with him. It doesn't seem rational to you? Well, rational, I disagree with him. I don't understand the physical anatomical basis for that. Okay. Can you think of any physical or anatomical basis for that? Yes. The impact of the right upper arm as a result of the shotgun blast through the arm, pushing or smashing the right arm against the chest wall. Now, my question had to do with Dr. Lawrence. Can you think of any laws of physics or laws of anatomy that would support what Dr. Lawrence is saying? No. I can see if you had a garment that maybe had a metallic button or something hard plastic or so on, it making a scratch mark, a linear abrasion, sure, that's within the realm of possibility, but just look at what you have there. You have large areas of bruising. That's what they are. Constitutions are bruising. Abrasions are scratch marks. There's nothing linear. There's nothing that is patterned. These are larger, superficial injuries involving the epidermis. They are not perforating or puncturing wounds. There's the other thing, too, that fits in with what I'm saying that, these indicate something of what we call blunt force traumatic nature. What does blunt force trauma mean? I know what it means, but explain it to the jury. No, I understand. I understand. Blunt force trauma is the application of force from any kind of any object against the body that does not produce a penetrating or perforating wound. It may lead to a bruise, an abrasion. It may lead to a deep laceration. It can be anything. A piece of wood, a piece of metal, my fist, a typewriter, the judge's gavel, anything. Motor vehicular accident trauma. Any of that is what we would call blunt force trauma. And is that in contrast to projectile trauma, which is penetrating, or stabbing trauma, which is penetrating? Yes, that's correct. Now, based on your review of the scene photographs, do you have an opinion, Dr. Wecht, as to whether or not this wound combination that we've been talking about, number 3 and number 6, could have occurred while Mr. Menendez was seated as shown in the cartoon illustration that's on the board? Objection, argumentative. Overruled. You're asking me, talking about the gunshot wound number 3 and the injuries on the chest, Dr. Golden's number 6, whether they could have been sustained while he was sitting or standing? That's your question? Well, I was starting with sitting, the way he's shown in the cartoon illustration. Oh, I'm sorry. In the two pictures in the middle of this exhibit 295, is that what you're asking me? Right, starting with that. First of all, do you understand what these pictures are supposed to be showing? Yes, I'm sorry. Go ahead. They're showing an injury coming from right to left. They're showing this area as an injury area. You didn't ask me that. I'm well aware of Dr. McCarthy's reconstruction and testimony on that, and I'm well aware of Dr. McCarthy's correlation of the injuries of Mr. Menendez's right arm with the injuries of his left elbow. But I didn't want to jump ahead of your question. You were just asking me, as I understood, about the wounds on the right arm and chest. Well, let's start with this. Here's a photograph of Mr. Menendez, one of many, which I believe you've had, which is D, showing his position on the couch and the position of his right arm. Okay? Yes. In your opinion, could he have gotten those wounds in this position while he was in that position? Or could he have gotten the wounds in his right arm while he was in that position? Sorry. No. I think it would have been very difficult to get those wounds while he was in that position because of the position that a shooter would have had to had, and then because of the directionality of the blood spatters that move across the chest from right to left. So I think that it would be very, very difficult, quite contorted. In fact, you talked about blood spatters, and you see these 3 photographs that are sublabeled H, I, and J? Yes. And they show blood spatters on the left side of Mr. Menendez's shirt? Yes. Those spatters show a certain direction? Yes. Is that direction consistent with what you have said about this wound as being an exit wound? Yes. Now, just moving on to in E and F on 295, we have the cartoon illustrations of objection, argumentative, refer to them as illustrations rather of the characterizing the cartoon illustrations. She calls them the cartoons. The state didn't like that. I want to make sure they're not. The court says they're illustrations. We can see that what they are. Ms. Abramson says, on this illustration, you see there's a lining up, if you will, of a wound to Mr. Menendez's left elbow and then a hypothetical entry wound to his right inner arm. Do you have an opinion? Yes, I see that. As to whether there is any relationship based on the medical evidence between the wound pattern on Mr. Menendez's left elbow and the wound on his upper right arm. Yes, I have an opinion. And what is that opinion? There is no relationship whatsoever between Mr. Menendez's left elbow wound number 4 in Dr. Golden's autopsy report and Mr. Menendez's wounds to 2 and 3 and 2 or just 3. And why is that? You have, oh, I'm sorry, that is the answer to your question. Why is that? The wound to the elbow, number 4, consists of multiple individual pellet defects. You already have the blast dispersing when it hits the left elbow. There's no way in the world that the pellets, which are moving in conical fashion, right? So it starts out, like this and gets wider. So that's what it means by conical. And there's no way, he says, in the world that the pellets, which are moving in a conical fashion outward, are going to then come back together in a consolidated fashion and make a singular large defect in the inner aspect of the right arm. There is no way in the world that any shotgun blast is going to disperse and then come back. You can have something that causes greater dispersal, an immediate target, or so on, but you can't have dispersing and then coming back together in reverse conical fashion, like going back to the bottom of the ice cream cone. There's no way in the world that you can have a shot striking his left elbow, producing multiple pellet wounds and then continuing on to make a definitive wound or 6 by 4 definition, 6 by 4 dimensions on the upper inner aspect of his right arm, which is seen in the middle photo of the far left column. What about the individual satellite defects on the inner right arm if those were entrants? That's a possibility that some of the pellets from the left elbow could have gone over and made some entrance holes in the upper right arm. That's possible. You see, you can get into all of these dispersal patterns and you simply can't know exactly what they are because when you're determining dispersal patterns, you can only do so if you have the very weapon which is known or believed to have been used with the exact ammunition to reproduce it. And you then have to have the autopsy findings with precise measurements, the diameter of the dispersal pattern, the number of pellet wounds, the location of the injuries, the presence or pellets of wadding in the body, and so on. You need all of those things to attempt to put things together. You can't just do this even with another weapon or an identical model. They can vary from one identical model to the other. That's very clear, and it is well documented in the forensic pathology literature on shotgun wounds. It has to be that weapon with the exact bore, either full choke, modified choke, improved cylinder, cylinder bore, ranging from the tightest constriction to no constriction, and you have to have precise measurements in autopsy. And even then, you have to be careful. We measure with the body in the anatomical position. So, what is the precise measurement? If my arm is this way at the autopsy table, then the diameter is X inches. If my arm in real life, when I had been shot, had been like this, then the diameter is Y inches. You've got to be very careful about these things, and there's so many variables. And on X-rays, you have what is called the billiard ball effect. Then they go in maybe clump together, and then they can smash. So the pellets themselves can clump and smash like billiard balls. And smash into each other like billiard balls when you use your cue ball and break the rack boom, and they go all over the table and so on. Could you have broken it from 2 feet away or 4 feet away? Or theoretically, if there was a billboard table 20 feet long, could you have done it then? And the answer is yes. So you can't even reconstruct in a kind of a anatomical retrograde fashion, working back out of the skin from the x-rays because of that billiard ball effect. It's a nightmare. meaning like it's a nightmare to reconstruct. The court says, okay, let's take our recess here, and you can. Ms. Abramson says, can I ask one question about the nightmare? The court says, yes. What you're saying is you can't always tell the trajectory coming in by what the dispersal pattern inside the body is because the pellets hit each other. You can determine trajectory to some extent, sure, front to back, right to left, and so on, but you can't be precise. And you have to keep in mind, too, the different positions of the body. So the answer is sometimes you can't even be sure of trajectory. If you shoot me in the head face on, that's one trajectory. What if I have my head turned this way, turned to your honor, and you shoot me when I'm laying on the autopsy table? You're going to get a true picture of how you shot me because I've got my head turned. You are or you're not. You're not going to get a true picture because I've got my head turned 90 degrees, arms and legs, and so on. The variations, not quite infinitesimal, meaning infinite, but are multiple. Thank you, says Ms. Abramson. The court says, okay, we'll take our recess. We'll resume at 20 minutes to the hour. Don't discuss the matter among yourselves or anyone else. Don't form any final opinions. We'll resume in 20 minutes and we're going to take our break and we'll continue tomorrow with Cyril Wecht. He's going to be on the stand for a couple episodes here. And just a reminder today, as you're viewing this, is Wednesday, August 20th, meaning tomorrow is the parole hearing. Sorry, I'm trying to get the blanket on the dog at the same time as I'm talking. She's not cooperating. Tomorrow is the first day of a 2-day parole hearing for the brothers. So be on the lookout for that. I will probably do some updates as well, or mostly on TikTok. I'll be updating, and then when everything's all said and done, and we have some kind of, wrap up, I'll do a follow up on that. So just letting you know, we probably won't have a whole lot of information, but there is likely going to be reporters in the courtroom, so I'll report back what's being reported, I guess, is pretty much all we'll know because we're not going to have an ultimate decision yet. It's going to be, probably 30 days, I think it is, or 40 days, something, they have a timeline to come up with the parole board hearing, or the parole board has a timeline to come up with their answer, their determination. So they're going to review everything after these two hearings, and then we all just have to wait on pins and needles until we hear something from them. So that's pretty much what it's going to be. So don't get your hopes up that we're going to find out anything this week necessarily. Unless, I mean, they might, you never know, but they do have the time to write out their determination and their decision. So um, just keep that in mind as we go through the week. So thank you guys so much for watching. I really appreciate you. This is a long trial. In comparing it to Delphi, their witnesses are going so fast. And here we've got these witnesses that are taking days upon days upon days to get through because it's just so convoluted, and the crime scene itself was so convoluted. And at least the state is allowing them to get into how convoluted it is. Whereas in Delphi, so much of it was not allowed, and they really streamlined, as the state streamlined their case in the motions prior to trial to get the defense to not be able to talk about certain things so that they could just pinpoint what they wanted and go boom 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 and kind of run through their witnesses very quickly and not touch upon the things that are really problematic in the case. And then the defense is kind of stuck because they can't bring it out in cross examination, and then they can't call anybody on it either. So, and then of course you've got Judge Gohl, who would probably um, sustain anything anyways and not let them get into anything, even if the door had been opened to third party, which it did, in my opinion. But she still blocked them. In this case, they're allowed to get into a lot of it. They're allowed to really attack the forensics, which is good. But we haven't seen yet, right now that is their case so far. Whereas in the past case, they weren't attacking the forensics so much. They were really coming at it from a, okay, they did it, but here's why they did it. Because of all the many, many, many years of abuse, and they put on witness after witness after witness to show that, to demonstrate that. And I think they did it well in the first trial. This trial so far, a little different strategy. They are attacking the forensics, but I think they were forced to because of the state bringing on Dr. Lawrence and Dr. McCarthy this time. Because without bringing those two witnesses on, they wouldn't have had to bring on what, three, four, five witnesses already just to say the forensics is crap. Your forensic analysis diagrams are crap. So that's kind of what I think has been the defense was forced. The state forced the defense's hand to do that, to really put a lot of strategy into countering that, which I think they're doing an excellent job so far. Let me know what you think in the comments below. I appreciate you guys. Like I said, I really thank you for being here, for watching on YouTube and on Rumble. Thank you guys. I will see you in the next one. Take care. Bye now.